The Lisbon Earthquake of 1755. On the morning of November 1st, 1755, Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, was struck by one of the most catastrophic earthquakes in recorded European history. The disaster came on All Saints' Day, when churches were packed with worshippers. Within minutes, a city celebrated for its wealth and culture was reduced to ruins, leaving survivors to face fire, flood, and despair. The quake, estimated at magnitude 8.5 to 9.0, ripped through the city just after 9 in the morning. Buildings collapsed instantly, crushing thousands. Survivors who fled into the streets found themselves trapped between falling masonry and massive fissures that tore open the ground. As people rushed toward the waterfront for safety, they witnessed the sea withdraw, only to return moments later as a massive tsunami that swallowed ships, docks, and entire crowds along the shore. The destruction didn't end there. Fires ignited from toppled candles and cooking hearths, merging into a firestorm that raged for nearly a week. By the time the chaos subsided, as many as 60,000 people were dead. Lisbon, one of Europe's great capitals, was nearly annihilated. The earthquake's impact stretched beyond Portugal. Shockwaves were felt across Europe and North Africa, and the tsunami reached as far as the Caribbean. In Europe, the disaster shook intellectual life as deeply as it shook the earth itself. The devastation forced philosophers and theologians to grapple with questions of faith and reason. Voltaire famously referenced the event in Candide, using it to challenge the idea of a benevolent, ordered universe. For Portugal, the earthquake reshaped both its city and its future. The Marquis of Pombal, the king's prime minister, oversaw the rebuilding of Lisbon, introducing modern urban planning with wide streets and earthquake-resistant construction. Yet for the soldiers, priests, citizens, and families who lived through that morning, the Lisbon earthquake of 1755 was not an event of theory or philosophy, but a living nightmare where the earth itself turned against them. The San Francisco earthquake of 1906. At 5:12 in the morning on April 18, 1906, San Francisco was shaken awake by one of the most destructive earthquakes in American history. Lasting less than a minute, the quake tore open the earth, toppled buildings, and triggered fires that would rage for days, reducing much of the city to rubble and ash. The earthquake, estimated at magnitude 7.8, ripped along nearly 300 miles of the San Andreas Fault. The violent shaking flattened wooden houses, split roads, and collapsed brick and stone buildings instantly. Survivors described the ground rolling in waves, tossing people from their feet and throwing streetcars from their tracks. Water mains burst across the city, crippling firefighters just when they were needed most. What the earthquake didn't destroy, fire finished. Gas lines ruptured, and flames spread rapidly through neighborhoods. With no water pressure, fire crews dynamited entire blocks in desperate attempts to stop the inferno. For 3 days, fires raged across San Francisco, consuming more than 500 city blocks. Entire districts, from the bustling financial quarter to the working-class waterfront, were reduced to ashes. The human toll was staggering. Official death counts listed about 3,000 lives lost, but modern estimates suggest the true number may have been more than 5,000. Hundreds of thousands were left homeless, forced to live in makeshift camps in parks and open spaces. Disease and hunger loomed as the city struggled to provide food, shelter, and order. Yet out of the devastation came resilience. San Francisco quickly began to rebuild, with architects and engineers designing stronger, more modern structures. The disaster also spurred advances in seismology and urban planning across the United States. For the soldiers, firefighters, and ordinary citizens who endured it, the San Francisco earthquake of 1906 was more than a natural disaster. It was a test of survival, courage, and determination against a city-sized inferno. The Shaanxi Earthquake of 1556. In the early hours of January 23, 1556, the Chinese province of Shaanxi was struck by the deadliest earthquake in recorded history. Known as the Jiaojing Earthquake, after the Ming Dynasty emperor at the time, it is estimated to have killed more than 800,000 people. The devastation was so complete that it reshaped entire regions and entered history as a disaster beyond imagination. The quake, estimated at magnitude 8.0, was centered in the Weihai Valley, a region known for its loess soil, a soft, easily collapsible earth that had been carved into cliffs and caves where people built their homes. These Yaodong cave dwellings collapsed instantly when the ground shook, burying entire families alive. In some counties, reports say more than half of the population perished within minutes. The destruction stretched across hundreds of miles, devastating Shaanxi and neighboring provinces. Historical records describe mountains shifting, rivers changing course, and fissures opening in the ground wide enough to swallow houses. Whole towns disappeared overnight. Survivors were left with nothing: no homes, no food supplies, and no way to rebuild in landscapes transformed into rubble and dust. Beyond the immediate deaths, famine and disease followed. With infrastructure gone, crops destroyed, and water sources disrupted, communities starved. The scale of the disaster overwhelmed the Ming government, which could provide only limited relief. Generations later, the memory of the earthquake remained in Chinese chronicles, etched as a warning of nature's terrifying power. The Shaanxi Earthquake stands out not only for its death toll, but also for how it revealed the vulnerability of human settlement. Building into soft, loess soil had seemed practical for centuries, but in the face of seismic fury, it became a death trap. Today, it remains a sobering reminder that geography, architecture, and natural forces can combine to create catastrophes of unimaginable scale. The Tangshan Earthquake of 1976. On July 28, 1976, at 3:42 in the morning, the industrial city of Tangshan in northern China was struck by one of the deadliest earthquakes of the 20th century. Without warning, the city of 1 million people was reduced to rubble in less than a minute. The quake measured 7.5 on the Richter scale, though some estimates put it higher. Because it struck so close to the surface, its power was concentrated directly on the city. Concrete apartment blocks, factories, hospitals, and schools crumbled instantly. 90% of Tangshan's buildings were either destroyed or severely damaged. Entire families were trapped as they slept, crushed under collapsing walls and ceilings. The human toll was staggering. Official Chinese government figures reported about 240,000 dead, but later estimates suggest the real number may have been closer to 300,000. Hundreds of thousands more were injured. Survivors described the city as silent but for the cries of the trapped and dying. Rescue efforts were hampered by aftershocks, including another massive quake later that day, which toppled already weakened structures and killed many rescue workers. Beyond the immediate destruction, the earthquake devastated China's industrial base. Tangshan was a major coal and steel hub, and its collapse crippled production. Entire neighborhoods disappeared. Infrastructure was wrecked, and survivors were left without shelter, food, or clean water. Disease and hunger followed in the weeks after, adding to the death toll. Politically, the earthquake struck at a sensitive time. It came just months before the death of Chairman Mao, and some in China interpreted it as a bad omen for the Communist Party. For years, the full scale of the disaster was hidden, with state media tightly controlling information. The Tangshan earthquake remains a chilling reminder of the vulnerability of urban centers to sudden seismic events. In less than 60 seconds, a thriving city was erased, and hundreds of thousands of lives were lost in one of the most catastrophic earthquakes in modern history. The Haiti Earthquake of 2010. On January 12, 2010, at 4:53 in the afternoon, a catastrophic earthquake struck near Port-au-Prince, the capital of Haiti. Measuring magnitude 7.0, it lasted only seconds, but its impact was devastating. In one of the poorest nations in the Western Hemisphere, where infrastructure was already fragile, the quake became a humanitarian disaster of global proportions. The epicenter lay just 16 miles from Port-au-Prince, concentrating destruction on the densely populated capital. Concrete buildings, homes, and government offices collapsed instantly. Hospitals, schools, and even the presidential palace crumbled, trapping thousands beneath rubble. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to dust. Survivors described choking clouds of debris, with screams echoing from beneath pancaked buildings. The human toll was staggering. Estimates suggest more than 200,000 people were killed, with hundreds of thousands more injured. Over 1.5 million were left homeless. Streets became filled with the wounded, while makeshift camps sprang up in parks and open fields. Without proper sanitation, disease loomed as another deadly threat. The disaster crippled Haiti's already limited infrastructure. Roads were blocked, the airport damaged, and communications severed. Rescue teams from around the world rushed to Haiti, but chaos slowed their efforts. Aid was desperately needed, yet distribution was plagued by bottlenecks, mismanagement, and lack of coordination. Beyond physical destruction, the earthquake tore at the country's social fabric. Families were separated, and countless children were orphaned. In the aftermath, there were reports of violence, looting, and exploitation. Cholera, introduced later by international peacekeepers, killed thousands more. Despite overwhelming tragedy, the Haitian people displayed extraordinary resilience. Communities came together, digging survivors out of rubble with their bare hands and sharing scarce resources. Global humanitarian efforts poured in, though rebuilding has remained slow and uneven even years later. The Haiti earthquake of 2010 stands as one of the most catastrophic natural disasters in modern memory, exposing both the immense destructive power of nature and the tragic consequences of poverty and fragile infrastructure in the face of seismic fury. The Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami of 2004. On December 26, 2004, one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded struck beneath the Indian Ocean near Sumatra. Measuring magnitude 9.1 to 9.3, it unleashed a massive tsunami that became one of the deadliest natural disasters in modern history. Within hours, waves traveling at jet speed devastated coastlines across Asia and beyond, leaving a trail of destruction that spanned continents. The earthquake ruptured more than 900 miles of the seafloor, displacing enormous volumes of water. The resulting tsunami radiated outward, with waves up to 100 feet high striking Indonesia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, and India. Entire coastal towns were obliterated in minutes. Boats were tossed inland like toys, and entire families were swept out to sea before they could escape. The human toll was staggering. More than 230,000 people in 14 countries lost their lives, with Indonesia bearing the brunt of the casualties. Millions more were displaced, their homes and livelihoods erased in an instant. Survivors faced nightmarish scenes of devastation. Bodies lined shorelines, entire villages vanished, and infrastructure lay in ruins. The tsunami's reach shocked the world. Waves struck as far away as East Africa, killing hundreds in Somalia and Tanzania. Tourists on holiday beaches in Thailand and Sri Lanka were caught alongside locals, making the disaster truly global in its human impact. In the aftermath, the international community launched one of the largest humanitarian relief efforts in history. Billions of dollars in aid flowed to affected countries, and tens of thousands of responders worked to provide shelter, food, and medical care. The disaster also prompted the creation of a tsunami warning system for the Indian Ocean, aiming to prevent such massive loss of life in the future. The Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami of 2004 stands as a chilling reminder of nature's destructive power. In a matter of hours, it changed coastlines, shattered lives, and reminded the world of both our vulnerability and the urgent need for global cooperation in the face of disaster. The Kanto Earthquake of 1923. On September 1st, 1923, at just before noon, the Great Kanto Earthquake struck Japan, devastating the Tokyo-Yokohama region and killing more than 140,000 people. Measuring magnitude 7.9, the quake was one of the deadliest in Japanese history, leveling cities, sparking massive fires, and leaving millions homeless. The timing of the quake magnified its destruction. It struck during lunchtime, when countless families were cooking meals over open flames. As buildings collapsed, stoves and braziers toppled, igniting fires that quickly merged into firestorms. Entire districts of Tokyo burned uncontrollably, with flames consuming wooden homes and businesses. In some areas, fire tornadoes, whirlwinds of flame and ash, swept through neighborhoods, leaving no chance of escape. The earthquake's immediate impact was catastrophic. Buildings across Tokyo and Yokohama crumbled, bridges collapsed, and rail lines twisted. Ships in Yokohama harbor were overturned, while landslides buried villages in the surrounding countryside. A tsunami struck coastal areas, compounding the destruction. Survivors described a city transformed into a smoldering wasteland, where cries of the trapped and injured echoed through the ruins. The human suffering was immense. Beyond the staggering death toll, more than 500,000 homes were destroyed, leaving millions displaced. Disease and starvation followed in the days after, as the city's infrastructure collapsed. Rumors and panic led to further tragedy. Vigilante mobs targeted ethnic Koreans and Chinese residents, fueled by false accusations of looting and sabotage, resulting in massacres that added a dark chapter to the disaster's history. The Kanto Earthquake left a lasting legacy. The destruction spurred major rebuilding efforts, reshaping Tokyo into a more modern city with wider streets and earthquake-resistant structures. It also influenced Japan's political climate, strengthening militarist factions that later steered the nation toward war. For survivors, however, the earthquake was remembered not as history's turning point, but as the day the ground, fire, and sea conspired to destroy everything. It remains one of the most haunting natural disasters in Japan's history, a reminder of the immense vulnerability of cities to sudden seismic fury. The Haiyuan Earthquake, China, 1920. On the evening of December 16, 1920, central China was devastated by one of the deadliest earthquakes in modern history, the Haiyuan Earthquake. Centered in Haiyuan County in what was then Gansu Province, now part of Ningxia, this quake is remembered not just for its strength, but for its staggering human cost and the lingering destruction it left behind. The quake is estimated at magnitude 7.8, with some sources suggesting it might have been even stronger. The tremor struck at 19:05 local time, tearing through rural districts whose buildings were poorly constructed and utterly unprepared for seismic forces. Whole villages collapsed in seconds. Landslides buried homes. Rivers cracked open. The ground split. The disaster belonged to more than just the initial shock. Aftershocks continued for years, leaving survivors on edge. Estimates of lives lost range from 258,000 to nearly 273,000. In many communities, more than 90% of buildings were destroyed. Many fatalities were due to secondary effects. Cold winter nights exposed survivors to freezing temperatures. Food shortages, disease, and displacement took their toll. More than 50,000 landslides were triggered in the epicentral region, making rescue difficult and scattering survivors across devastated terrain. In rural China at the time, infrastructure was minimal. Communication, medical care, and organized relief were all but impossible in remote, mountainous regions. For many, the quake meant not just that homes were lost, but that life afterward was a struggle against exposure, hunger, and isolation. The Haiyuan Earthquake remains a terrifying example of how nature's power multiplies when human vulnerability is already high. Thank you for watching. If you learned anything, let me know with a like, and comment below on what you would like to see in the future. History never runs out of surprises, and neither do we. So subscribe and join me for the next dive into the archives.